I'm thinking of making a subroutine that takes care of changing the value of a variable and doing a check right after that. And I'm gonna put it inside of a subroutine. Make sure I return from the subroutine. So this is if I put everything in the same file. I generally try to extract subroutines and put them into their own file. And now I have to change GoSub to GoSubScene, and going to the file subs and calls the subroutine named decrease energy. So it should do the same thing. And since I have removed that subroutine from the startup page, I don't need to do this jump ahead method anymore. I don't even have to have a label here, since everything will start from the top of startup.txt and just work downward. I want to do something with the energy once it reaches 0. So this line of text is printed by the subroutine because the second time we call the subroutine, the value becomes less than 1. I should add the line break inside the subroutine. What if we make this subroutine that can do both addition and subtraction? First, we set up a scenario. Now we're going to change all of those subroutine calls. For the minus ones, I'm going to put quotation around them. Don't worry about it if you don't understand what's happening. I need to update the subroutine for it to make sense. The subroutine call now has a parameter. It's going to be slightly more complicated in the subroutine. First, the name is going to be different, and then the parameters. So the amount is that number that we typed at the end. The reason I use a quotation around the negative numbers because of something that's quirky with the ChoiceScript engine. The actual JavaScript underneath ChoiceScript can interpret a negative number just fine, but here it interprets -3 as -3. We give it a default case. The first part was a -2 applied to 5, ends with 3. So far so good. So here we have the if else requirement for me to use the goto at the end of the code here. I don't want to deal with it right now, so I'm going to use implicit control flow, I think. Three minus 3 is 0. So far the subroutine is working, and we do an addition to it. If I change this one to 6, it should say that you're full of energy. And if you want to make this subroutine even more generic, that it can change a different kind of variable value, Let's say your game jam is counted by page number. So this means we now have two parameter values for the subroutine update stat. So the first one is going to be the stat. Second one is still going to be the number amount. And now we cannot just hard code energy in this subroutine. We have to use the stat value, referring to a variable given its the name, which is a string value. We are going to use this bracket, not with the $sign in front of it. So it's any time that you need to refer to the variable, you're basically giving it a string value inside of this bracket, and the bracket will call up the variable. But here the problem is it does not distinguish between age or energy. Let's do a check. We should do all of that inside its own if block, and make sure you have the indentation correct. All of this if else is inside of this first if. Got to change the subroutine name. I noticed that there is this extra white space. I will fix it later. So this if condition is false. So I think it's because when we pass in the parameter, that represents string. We need the bracket here to refer to the value of the variable and not just what that variable's name is called. Whereas here, if I put a bracket, it will be referring to a number compared to the string energy. That's why this if condition will never be true. It's comparing a number to a string. That's why I needed to remove the bracket for this part to work. As for this line break, if I include it on the outside, it will have a line break at all times when you call the subroutine. You reached energy at 0, you should not be able to do anything more. Let's see if we can fix that logic. This syntax for disabling a choice if the condition is false. I need to have an option enabled in certain cases. And I just have one that's potentially false, therefore making a game stuck at that point. And we want to be able to try the game jam option again. So we should do a loop back to itself. But remember that because we're not hiding this option after it's being used, we can drink coffee repeatedly. Okay, so first time we drink coffee, we regain 3 points of energy. We still cannot do the game jam option because energy is not greater than 4. So we drink coffee again. So this becomes selectable. If we keep drinking coffee to finish the game jam, the thrill of finishing will give you more energy. Maybe that's too much. Just give it 2. Let's say we want to limit the coffee intake. We cannot count it here because every time we loop back to this label, the count will be set to 0. This amount will never be more than 1. But as long as this temp variable is before this label, I think it should work. If we cannot drink coffee anymore, this option should disappear. But maybe it will throw an error again, telling me that both of these options might be potentially unselectable. Drink coffee again, and now the drink coffee option is gone. If I change this to 2, so far so good. So by the time I've chosen drink coffee once, this option becomes unavailable, leaving one option that's potentially false. I don't know if the engine actually checks if it's true or false at this point. It will definitely think that it could be false, trying to prevent me from continuing. The other option is go to bed. You can drink coffee once, but it's not enough to finish the game jam. Have to go to bed. You have enough energy now, but you didn't work on the code. I think logically this might be the best case, put the coffee count at 2. So now you have a legitimate choice between the 2 options. I'm just going to extract this description inside the subroutine to the stats page. And I want to arrange these values in a different way. This is easier to think about the ranges of value that this variable can have. So if energy is 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, it will have the value of you still have energy to use. So at this point, it's at 0. You drink some coffee, you're up to 6. And now the stat should say full of energy. Yep. Just like what the subroutine is printing out. One thing I saw in one of the work in progress games is repeating a chapter. I think that it's just going back to a previous label, but taking care to reset the variable values to where that label starts with. You will have to save a temporary copy of all the variables values you have at that point, and then when you reach here, you resave those values back into the variables. But depending on how many variables you have in your game, this might be a pretty tedious process. It's helpful because ChoiceScript doesn't give you a back option. Let's try this out. So before you loop back to task 2, you set the main variables back to their temporary version, which was not changed during this sequence. And if we go back to this point, task 2, we should have 3 points of energy and not 5. Once again, we're going to try drinking coffee and finish the game jam. We're at 8, and let's time travel back to task 2. And we should be down to 0 page count again. Okay, so this works. This might be like one chapter out of the whole story, and you are doing this at the very end of that chapter. You set all of your variables back to their temporary values that you saved at the beginning. So this task 2 in that situation would be the beginning of that chapter.